Koenigsegg. Now, you could be forgiven for not having heard that name before, but it's a name that should be far better known when it comes to cars. Now, a quick history lesson. We'll go back, a few years. The McLaren F1 was the fastest car in the world for a little over 10 years, in one variation or another. The first car to beat it was the Koenigsegg CCR. Koenigsegg it's a small Swedish company. At the moment there were only about probably 60 or so cars in the world. Now the CCR wasn't able to hold that record for very long because the Bugatti Veyron came along and beat it. It wasn't really a fair thing because the Bugatti actually had a straight road. It's a closed road owned by Volkswagen. So Koenigsegg didn't have access to it. They only had a circular track. Now that we've made it to the Koenigsegg, we'll go back a little bit again. The first concept was revealed in 1994. It was the Koenigsegg CC concept. CC standing for Competition Coupe, or Coupe. The next model was the CC8S. It didn't change a lot, producing 655 brake horsepower. Now it was a Ford DOCH engine, which from that Koenigsegg have derived their own engine, which was developed entirely in-house. It's based on the Ford engine, but it has very little to do with the Ford engine anymore. The new engine, which first appeared in the CCR, was a supercharged engine, still a 4.7 litre V8, producing 806 brake horsepower at the rear wheels. Now, a lot of people get the CC8S and the CCR confused. I have a picture for you. There you go. The CC8S, if you can see that. I'm hoping this works. And, yeah. Now, a lot of people get them confused, including the people from Top Gear, which would barely know a CCR from a CCX, and we'll get to that later. The CC8S, like I mentioned, it uses a Ford engine, producing 655 brake horsepower. The CCR was the first to have the Koenigsegg engine, which was still a 4.7 litre V8 with a supercharger, now producing 806. And there's the CCR there. Now, I'm not sure which was the car tested, the first Koenigsegg tested on Top Gear, if it was a CC8S or a CCR. Because they called it a CCR, yet they quoted a mere 655 brake horsepower. So it was probably a CC8S. But anyway. Now the CCR was the first car to beat the McLaren F1 after over 10 years as the fastest car in the world. Then the R is just an R, it's Competition Coupe R. After the CCR, move on to the CCX. Now the CCX was built for the 10th anniversary of the original concept. They switched to a twin supercharger configuration, still producing 806 brake horsepower, probably closer to about 1,000 at the flywheel though, from what I hear. Now, the CCX was built slightly longer to comply with American safety standards and slightly higher to make it a bit more comfortable. It was also slightly more angular in its styling, and they introduced the optional rear wing, if you can see that there. There was already an optional wing available. The CCX, with its 806 brake horsepower, only weighs 1,180 kilos, as opposed to Bugatti's almost 2 tons, or 2,000 kilos. No, I'm not going to give you Imperial for that, because I don't know it. Now, after the CCX, Koenigsegg started thinking greener. Want to be a bit environmentally friendly. So they decided, why don't we try, putting the car on biofuel. E85 to be exact, although it is actually a flex fuel car. And we now have the CCXR. It looks exactly the same, but contrary to popular belief, it is a separate model. You can have your CCX converted to run on E85, but you can also buy a proper CCXR from the factory. Now, power gains can be expected when using biofuel because when you get to E85, you have a higher octane rating of about 113 RON, and also the ethanol helps cool the engine, so you can get a bit more out of it. But even the Koenigsegg engineers were surprised when they got 1,018 brake horsepower out of the engine. Now, rumour has it it's closer to 1,200, and in Top Gear magazine, one of the people from Top Gear magazine, can't remember who, was taking a tour of the factory and saw one on the dyno producing 1,064 brake horsepower, about 1,000 RPM before redline. So 1,200 horsepower is believable. Now, when you think about it, okay, the Koenigsegg is, what, 700 kilos lighter than the Bugatti, and actually has 1,000 horsepower, well, over 1,000 horsepower. Because if you actually look into it, the Bugatti does not produce 1,000 brake horsepower, let alone 1,001. It produces somewhere in the order of 970 odd. To get 1,001, they use a French measurement of PS. I'm not sure what that stands for, but in PS it works out to actually 1,004. But still, in real horsepower, it's only 970 odd. So let's see. The Koenigsegg has more power, less weight. In theory, it should actually be faster than the Bugatti, but they've had no chance to really test it properly. So it should be interesting if they ever do get the chance, and Koenigsegg can reclaim the crown. Now, Koenigsegg meaning kingmaker in Swedish, it would be rather appropriate. Now, from the CCXR, I mean, they'd only produced, what, 50 odd cars? Including CC8S, CCR, CCX, and now CCXR. They decided, oh, that's not exclusive enough. We'll build an even more exclusive model. We'll call it the Edition. Yes, not very creative, but there you go. It's got bare carbon fibre with little bits of red trim, just to break it up a bit. Now the Edition for the CCX now produces 888 brake horsepower, and the Edition of the CCXR still 1,018. Now, what they changed with this car is the front splitter is a little bit bigger. The whole car is a bit lower to the ground and the suspension's a bit stiffer. It's more track focused overall. And they've added this huge rear wing on the back because it is a more track focused car, which it is removable and adjustable. Now, as you may have noticed in the picture of the CCR, I won't bother going back to that now. The doors. They're not, scissor doors or gull-wing doors or butterfly doors. No, technically they're called Raptor doors. And don't ask me what the system is called, because it's cyclohedric something. I could look it up, but I'm not going to bother because nobody really cares. But in short, it opens in a way that baffles the mind. It sort of comes up and out, and yes, but it's very cool. And if you see it in person, it's something else. Not to mention if you hear it in person.